Imagine a nation once among the richest in the world. A country with glittering cities, vast fertile lands and a vibrant culture. And the capital city was known as the Paris of South America. But the same country would later become synonymous with economic collapse, runaway inflation and a severe debt crisis that shook global markets. This is the extraordinary story of Argentina, a nation that soared to unimaginable heights, fell from grace and now stands at the crossroads of a potential rebirth under the most unlikely of leaders. Argentina's story is so unique that no other nation has experienced such a dramatic rise and fall. Most countries follow a more linear path, from poverty to gradual development. Argentina defied that narrative. It went from being a global power to a developing country again, a cautionary tale for nations that take prosperity for granted. The fall of Argentina is a reminder that wealth alone isn't enough. Even the mightiest can fall without sound policies, political stability and long-term vision. But is this all there is to the story? Was Argentina ever really a developed country to begin with? Was industrialization on par with other superpowers at the time? Or merely impressive statistics for those with tunnel vision? Let's dig deeper in today's Before and After. In the early 20th century, Argentina was the poster child of prosperity. By 1913, it was one of the world's top 10 wealthiest nations, rivaling the United States, France, and Germany. Its secret? A booming export economy powered by its agricultural riches. Argentina's fertile pampas were the world's breadbasket that fed millions. Ports like Buenos Aires hummed with trade, making it a vital player in the global economy. Argentina was progressive for its time. Free public education, expansive infrastructure, and universal suffrage created a thriving middle class. The country even attracted waves of European immigrants, drawn by the promise of a better life. Its capital, Buenos Aires, earned the nickname the Paris of South America. Grand boulevards, neoclassical architecture, and an unparalleled cultural scene put Argentina on the world stage. It seemed like the nation's rise would know no bounds. But just as the world admired Argentina's ascent, cracks began forming beneath the surface. Argentina's early wealth wasn't evenly distributed. Behind the country's booming economy was a powerful class of large land-owning oligarchs known as the estancieros. These elite families controlled vast swaths of Argentina's fertile pampas, exporting beef and grain to European markets at immense profits. But how did these landowners get their land to begin with? After stealing vast tracts of land from the natives, the Spanish typically granted it to those who participated in taking it. These were often people who helped with military conquests, founded settlements, or the classic, a good old-fashioned brown nose. There was even a time when the Spanish government dealt with office selling due to the dire fiscal situation of the crown for both provincial and central government offices. The main ambition of these landowners was often to expand their wealth. For the Spanish crown, the Argentine motivation was to extract wealth, so their interests aligned, and there was little need to develop or diversify the local economy. Meanwhile, most laborers in Argentina were still indentured servants. These laboring peones could not afford consumer goods, and the elite liked it that way. These rural workers had few rights or protections, and labor laws did not apply to them until 1944. So, while the majority of wealth remained concentrated in the hands of a few and GDP per capita soared, the average Argentine worker saw little of this prosperity. In 1943, the country's top 1% wealthiest people received 27% of total incomes. But just how bad is that relative to other countries? Well, it's far worse than the same metric in the US during the Great Depression, where it was 19%. The United States imposed sanctions on Argentina in the post-war period, not for political reasons, but rather for commercial competition. These sanctions were promoted by the agricultural sector, as the country was its main competitor in that economic arena. This was a necessary consequence for the US to maintain its own economic size. Argentina's economic structure was built on a narrow foundation: agriculture and raw material exports, without significant industrial development or investment in education. Argentina looked rich on paper, but a closer look revealed gaps that would haunt it later. Despite its wealth, Argentina lagged behind every other developed nation in key areas. Education levels were lower than in Europe, literacy rates were poor, and income inequality remained stark. Rather than diversifying, Argentina remained heavily reliant on agriculture. When global markets shifted, Argentina's economy had little to fall back on. A nation that once looked like a rising superpower quickly found itself exposed. What went wrong? Argentina's fall is a story of political mismanagement, economic instability, and broken systems. The 20th century saw Argentina embroiled in coups, dictatorships, and ideological clashes. The rise of Peronism in the 1940s under President Juan Perón marked a turning point. While his policies aimed to empower workers and redistribute wealth, they also introduced economic inefficiencies. Perón's rise to power in the 1940s promised a new era of economic justice and national strength. His policies aimed to break the grip of Argentina's wealthy, land-owning oligarchs, who had long controlled the nation's economy. While he made significant progress in reducing income inequality and empowering the working class, he never truly dismantled Argentina's deep-rooted structural weaknesses. For a time, Perón's import substitution industrialization strategy seemed to work. Argentina's factories boomed, workers earned better wages, and the country thrived under a protective economic bubble. But this prosperity was built on an illusion. Perón's economic success depended heavily on high global demand for Argentina's agricultural exports, particularly beef and grain. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, commodity prices collapsed and export revenues shrank, starving the economy of foreign currency. The government could no longer afford its generous social programs, and inflation skyrocketed, weakening purchasing power and worker wages. Perón tried to expand state control over the economy to maintain his support, increasing spending even as revenues declined. This only deepened Argentina's economic troubles. By 1952, the cracks in Perón's system were undeniable. As economic conditions worsened, Perón faced growing opposition from both the military and the elite. His response was to double down on repression. He clashed with the Catholic Church, alienating a major power in Argentina. He tightened control over the media, silenced critics, and expanded state intervention in the economy. By 1955, Argentina was in turmoil. The military staged a coup that forced Perón into exile, while his social reforms had undeniably improved life for the working class. His economic model proved unsustainable. Argentina was left deeply polarized, with Peronists and anti-Peronists locked in an ideological struggle that would shape the country's future. With Perón gone, Argentina entered a period of extreme volatility. Successive governments swung between military rule and weak democratic experiments, each failing to stabilize the economy. The military reversed many of Perón's reforms, crushing unions and privatizing industries. The inflation became a permanent feature of Argentina's economy. Frequent political coups created instability, preventing long-term economic planning. In 1973, Perón briefly returned to power, but he was a shadow of his former self. He died in 1974, leaving the country in crisis once again. His successor, his wife Isabel Perón, could not govern effectively, and Argentina descended into chaos. By 1976, another military coup overthrew the government, plunging Argentina into a brutal dictatorship known as the Dirty War. The military junta that took power in 1976 promised economic stability, but delivered disaster. The dictatorship crushed political opposition, took on massive foreign debt, and pushed neoliberal policies that widened inequality and destroyed Argentina's industrial sector. By the early 1980s, Argentina was collapsing again, this time under the weight of dictatorship and economic mismanagement. The final blow came in 1982 when the junta stupidly launched the Falklands War against Britain in a desperate bid to rally nationalist support. The war ended in humiliating defeat, forcing the military out of power. In 1983, Argentina returned to democracy, but the economy was shattered, debt-ridden, and hyperinflationary. The dream of Argentina as a global powerhouse had entirely collapsed. How did a country, once among the world's wealthiest, fall so far? The government defaulted on loans in 2001, plunging the nation into its worst economic crisis yet. Perhaps the most crippling aspect of Argentina's decline was inflation, a problem so persistent it became a defining feature of daily life that eroded trust in the Argentine peso. Citizens hoarded US dollars as a safer alternative, and businesses struggled to survive in such an unpredictable economy. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Simon Kuznets famously remarked that there are 4 types of economies in the world: developed countries, underdeveloped countries, Japan, and Argentina. Kuznets' insight was that Argentina didn't fit the traditional mold of economic development. The country had all the signs of wealth. Still, it lacked the structural foundations to sustain it. Unlike nations that reinvested their wealth into widespread industrialization and human capital, Argentina's economy remained heavily dependent on raw material exports like beef and grain. This created an illusion of prosperity. On paper, Argentina was rich, but key indicators like education levels, literacy rates, income distribution, and economic diversification lagged behind truly developed nations. It was a country that had risen to great heights without the solid foundations needed to stay there, and that's why its dramatic fall was so unprecedented in economic history. Now, Argentina faces a rare opportunity for redemption. The question is, can it finally rebuild the missing pieces of its economic puzzle? Or will history repeat itself once again? Enter Javier Milei, Argentina's unorthodox and fiery new president. An economist by trade and a libertarian by ideology, Milei campaigned on the promises of drastic reform. For many, his election represents not just change, but a lifeline. Milei's rise to power came on the back of frustration. With decades of mismanagement, he's already taken bold steps, including balancing Argentina's national budget for the first time in years, a feature once thought impossible. One of Milei's most radical ideas is replacing the peso with the US dollar to stabilize the economy and curb inflation. While controversial, it has given hope to millions of Argentinians desperate for economic stability. Milei's reforms aim to dismantle inefficiencies, privatize bloated state enterprises, and reduce corruption. The road ahead is far from easy, but his determination has reignited hope in a nation long accustomed to despair. The question remains, can Argentina rise again? History shows us the resilience of the Argentine spirit. The nation has weathered countless storms from its golden age to its darkest days. Today, there's a cautious optimism that Argentina can write a new chapter. With Milei at the helm, the road to redemption may not be smooth, but it's one paved with potential. If his reforms succeed, Argentina could again stand tall as a nation of promise and prosperity. For one thing, Javier Milei has managed to stabilize the nation's budget for the first time in many years, and perhaps he can turn things around. Argentina's story is one of extremes, of extraordinary success and heart-wrenching failure. But it's also a story of hope. The world watches closely as the nation faces the future with bold reforms and renewed determination. Will Argentina's redemption arc become a reality? Only time will tell. But one thing is sure, Argentina's story is far from over. If you like this video, please consider watching one of these two videos next.